want to start like I do all my retreats and everything. I always start with some chanting because I think a sort of devotional heart quality is important to bring to our spiritual journey. So I want to start with a Theravadan Buddhist chant that I did every day during the year and a half that I was a Theravadan monk. And it's a little devotional kind of chant. It means literally honor to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. And then at the end, I'll do a little refuge prayer in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, which is the enlightened one, the community of enlightened ones, or the teaching of the enlightened ones, and the community of enlightened ones. So we'll just start with that and get in a kind of proper spirit. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami, dhammam saranam gacchami, sangham saranam gacchami. Okay, so today the title of my talk is No Self, True Self, and I think there's some sort of little subtitle there, which I assume you've read if you're here. But we're going to talk a little bit about that. I think the teaching on no self is a teaching that's very, very important and very crucial to the teaching of the Buddha and just to life in general and living life fruitfully. But I think it's often misunderstood, so I wanted to reflect a little bit on the teaching. That suddenly popped up. And on the misconceptions about it, what it means, what it doesn't mean. So I think it's important to understand that there are basically two parallel paths that are going on sort of simultaneously on the spiritual journey. The first is this selflessness, this reality of no self, the ultimate kind of emptiness of the me, on some level. We have to realize that. We have to awaken to that. The other thing that we need to kind of develop and awaken to is a healthy sense of a personal sense of self. We have to kind of understand what that means, our personal sense of self, and what it doesn't mean. And we have to kind of appreciate it, nurture it, embrace it, express it in the world. It's very important for all of us. So let's first look at the teaching and the experience of no self. So no self in the teaching of the Buddha is related to some other teachings, actually. The other teachings that it's related to are often called interdependent arising. Thich Nhat Hanh has a beautiful word he's come up with. He calls it interbeing. So it's basically pointing to the reality that our being is not some sort of separate existing entity, but that it's interbeing, that our being is a being that is like existing simultaneously with all the other beings, all the other realities that exist in the entire cosmos. And I have a little quote by Thich Nhat Hanh that I'd like to read. It's quite beautiful, actually, and it's about interbeing. So I want you to try to just look at this paper, kind of focus in on this paper, contemplate the paper, be the paper. And I'll read this little quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, "If you are a poet or a bodhisattva, you will see clearly that there is a cloud in this paper. Without a cloud, there will be no water, and without water, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, you cannot make paper. So the cloud is in this paper. The existence of this paper is interdependent on the existence of a cloud. Paper and cloud are therefore one. Let us think of other things like sunshine. Sunshine is very important because the forest cannot grow without sunshine, and we human beings cannot grow or live without sunshine. So the logger needs sunshine in order to cut down the tree that grew because of sunshine. Therefore, you can also see sunshine in this sheet of paper. And if you look more deeply and with the eyes of a true bodhisattva, with the eyes of those who are awake, you see not only the cloud and the sunshine in the paper, but you see that everything is here in this paper. The wheat that became the bread for the logger to eat, the logger's father and mother, the whole earth on which all these things came to be. Everything is in this sheet of paper. This paper is empty of a separate self, but empty in this sense means that the paper is full of everything. You are like that too. The presence of the paper and the presence of you is the existence of the whole cosmos in a sheet of paper and in a person called by your name. The existence of everything. That is interbeing. That's what the Buddha is talking about, pointing to a little bit when he talks about no self. That there's no separate self. That the self is existing interdependently with everything else that exists. It's not just this sort of entity that somehow discretely exists on its own. So in the teaching of the Buddha, the self, the me, the you, is made up of what he calls 5 aggregates. The aggregates are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. So as long as those aggregates are holding together, we call that a human being, and we give it a name. It has various roles and functions. It moves through the world. It has relationships, and we think of that as me. But in reality, the Buddha is pointing to the truth that all those 5 aggregates are constantly changing sort of processes that are going on that are constantly in a state of flux. So when they come together and they seem to have a relative stability, we think of that as a person. But in reality, it's a constant flow of these 5 heaps of things, So it's nothing that you can really solidly hold on to. It's something that looks solid. The appearance is that there's a person here. You look at me and there's this solid person with a certain hair color and eye color and height and weight and, age and all that stuff. And you think, okay, that's Francis. But if you could look at me with some sort of microscopic kind of eyes, you would see that there's this constant turnover of cells in this form that we think of as Francis. And that's true for you as well. Other kind of analogies that I think point to the fluidity of self, to the constantly changing, ephemeral, sort of passing nature of the me, is these little kind of comparisons I've come up with. One that I really like is the idea of the Big Dipper. When I was a little kid, my dad was an engineer, but he was a kind of an armchair astronomer, I guess, and he had a big telescope on top of our house, and we'd go up there and look at stars and things, and he'd tell us the different constellations and so on. And I remember seeing the Big Dipper and thinking, oh, that's cool, it looks like a dipper, it looks like a big ladle or something. But what is the Big Dipper? It's a group of stars that we kind of form an artificial boundary around. We kind of collect this particular group, and we say, okay, that's the Big Dipper. But is that really the reality of what we call the Big Dipper? No, the Big Dipper is just a small little group of stars in the corner of the heavens that we've decided to kind of block off and give it a name and a form and so on. But in reality, it's just part of this big, huge heaven filled with stars, isn't it? And the same like the state of California that we're in. There's a geographical area that we think of as California. We have an artificial border around it on maps. If you fly over it, though, you know what? You don't see that, do you? You don't see anything that says California. You just see mountains and hills and plains and rivers and so on, and trees and rocks, But we call it California. It's kind of a useful fiction, isn't it? Because When we live in California, we can pay state taxes, we can get nice roads made, we can get water piped to us, we can have different services offered to us. We can get together and form political parties and vote for the new president of the United States. Hope all you Californians do that, please. I won't say anything more. So the Big Dipper, California, state of Ohio, Niagara Falls. I used to go to Niagara Falls as a child every year. We did like regular vacations. It seemed like we had a kind of a regular kind of vacation thing. We'd go to Florida one part of the year, we'd go to Niagara Falls the other part of the year. And you go to Niagara Falls and it's water flowing over a rock formation, And when you're looking at Niagara Falls is not the same Niagara Falls even 2 seconds after you first start looking at it. It's a different Niagara Falls. It appears to be the same Niagara Falls. We take pictures of it, we make them into postcards, and we send it to friends. Oh, hi, I'm at Niagara Falls. But Niagara Falls is just a kind of fiction, isn't it? Really, when you think about it. It's just a name for water flowing over a rock, and it's constantly changing. Well, you and I are like that, We're interdependent, like Thich Nhat Hanh said about the paper. We're not just existing separately, kind of discreetly on our own. We're existing because of all kinds of other factors, And that's kind of a little glimpse of no self. The Buddha talked about 3 characteristics to all conditioned, all phenomenal reality, including you and me. And those words in Pali are anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Anicca is impermanence. And we can all experience that, You can go back to your photo journal and look at your picture when you were 3 years old. You can look at your picture when you were in junior high. You can look at your picture when you got married. You can look at your picture when you retired or whatever. And you can see that we're constantly changing. We're impermanent. We all know people who have died. Maybe we're going to die one day. You think? Some of us might even know that. My brother just died. He knew for a year, that it was very likely that he was going to die. So we all know that it's just a matter of time. Eventually we're all going to die. So we're impermanent. We're dukkha, often translated as suffering. I think a more accurate translation of that Pali word is unsatisfactoriness, which is a kind of big word to get your tongue around. But it's basically pointing to the reality that phenomenal reality is imperfect. It's unsatisfactory. It doesn't satisfy us in any ultimate way. Why? Partly because it's anicca. Partly because it's impermanent. It's constantly changing. So it can't really be ultimately satisfying because as soon as it satisfies us, it's going to change on us. And it's anatta. Anatta. Atta means self. Is a prefix in Pali and Sanskrit also that kind of negates the noun that comes after. So anatta is no self. No self. And Buddha said that is one of the 3 characteristics of all phenomenal reality. No self. So there's no solid, separate, distinct sense of a self that really exists. It's a kind of convention. It's a useful fiction. So that's a kind of overview of no self. I don't have a lot of time, so I can't go into a scholarly academic kind of definition of no self. And no self is something that the Buddha said, if we observe reality closely and precisely, if we look at reality, we'll start to see those 3 characteristics. We'll start to see that everything, including the me, is anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Everything, without exception. And so we'll begin to see that there is no solid me. It's important for us to see that. Often when we take ourselves too seriously, we can get into trouble, in case you haven't noticed. I've taken myself too seriously a few times, and it's, gets me into trouble every time. So this insight into no self can kind of free us from that. We can kind of realize, okay, it's relatively important to me, but it's not like the be-all and end-all. It's not absolutely important. Has a relative importance, not absolutely important. That's a little look at no self, a little kind of overview. But secondly, let's look at some common misconceptions about no self. We hear a lot of talk about no self, and a lot of people in the spiritual world have some sense that they understand what no self means. And it does mean a lot of the things we just reflected on, but some of the things it doesn't mean. Let's maybe look at that. One thing it doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that the me does not exist at all. That's a very simplistic kind of understanding of no self. It does mean, however, that you don't exist in the way you thought you did. You exist, but in a radically different way than you thought. So, you exist fleetingly. As long as those aggregates that the Buddha talked about kind of come together, then we could say a human being exists by your name. And when those aggregates start to fall apart and dissolve, then we couldn't say we exist anymore. So it doesn't mean you don't exist, it just means you exist differently than you thought. Number two, no self is not meant to be a kind of prop for forming a new, interesting, fascinating spiritual ego or persona. Oddly enough, a lot of people seem to manage to kind of form a really solid kind of spiritual ego out of this kind of identity that they have no self. There's a little joke that you've probably heard. It's about the humble rabbi who came into the middle of his synagogue and he knelt down in the middle of the aisle and he said, "Oh God, I am nothing, I am nothing, I am nothing." And the cantor of the synagogue saw him doing this. He thought, wow, that's pretty edifying, pretty inspiring. I think I'll do that. So he gets down in the middle of the congregation, kneels down. "Oh God, I am nothing, I am nothing." See, that's my Catholic thing. We do that. I don't know. I don't think Jews do that, but Catholics do that. "I am nothing, I am nothing." They're less guilty than us, a little bit maybe. The janitor sees this great spectacle of the rabbi and the cantor in the middle of the, synagogue saying, "Oh God, I am nothing, I am nothing." He says, "How inspiring, my rabbi and my cantor, they're just such inspiring characters. I think I'm going to take up that kind of humility." So the janitor gets down in the middle of the synagogue. "Oh God, I am nothing, I am nothing, I'm nothing." Got these three guys, in the middle of the synagogue saying at the top of their lungs, "God, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, I'm nothing." And then suddenly the cantor is aware that the janitor's there. He nudges the rabbi and he goes, "Look who thinks he's nothing." So, don't build a spiritual ego around being nothing. There's a kind of stark irony there somehow. There's another little story that kind of illustrates this of the Zen master and the samurai. The samurai was studying with the Zen master for many years, going to all kinds of Zen sessions, meditating for hours on end like you do in Zen. I did Zen, believe me, it's no walk in the park. So he's doing all this work. He gets a little openings here and there. He sees something every now and then, sees the three characteristics. He sees the Four Noble Truths. He gets this and that. And then one day, he gets in a kind of experience of no self. So he goes to the Zen master very excited, and elated that he's kind of come in. He says, "Oh, master, I finally understand it. I understand the mystery of no self. I finally penetrated into that and I realize that I have absolutely no self." And the Zen master looks at him and he says, "You lazy, old, dirty, smelly samurai. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't have the first idea of what no self is." And he takes a tomato and lobs it and hits him in the side of the head. And the samurai, who is kind of like samurais, can be a little sensitive about things like that. So the samurai draws his sword, because he's highly trained. He takes the sword, he's ready to cut the head of the Zen master off for this great insult. And the Zen master suddenly looks up slyly and he says, "Funny how quickly no self is offended." So if we do build a spiritual ego around this kind of insight that we have into no self, life will tend to shake us up. It will send us a Zen master. It'll send us a rabbi or a janitor or something to shake us up and let us know that it's not something you build an ego around. Bhante Gunaratana, my Buddhist preceptor and teacher, the one who ordained me into the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, one time when I was ordained and in his forest monastery, came out at a big retreat, kind of walked out onto the little platform that he sat on, and he said, "If you people here think that you have a self, You're deluded. And he said, and if you people here think that you're no self, you're also deluded. And so by that time, everybody's a little puzzled. But what he was pointing at is that it's true to say there's no self, but it's also true to say there's a self. Like most truth, it's paradoxical. It's nuanced, it's subtle, it's complicated. It's not black and white, good and bad, true and false. You know? It's multifaceted. So as I said at the beginning of the talk, we need to understand that at the core of our being is this emptiness. But then we need to get beyond that and understand that being true, also there is a personal essence to who we are. There is a kind of very unique expression of who we are. That's unique for all of us. If you look around this room, you see all the different faces, each of them beautiful, but each of them utterly unique, you know, never to be seen again. That's how interesting and special they are. And for some reason, consciousness has chosen to incarnate, to express itself in all these myriads and myriads of forms. Not only human beings, but ducks and geese and birds of all kinds and dogs and cats and aardvarks and ants and mountains and hills and trees and rivers, you know? For some reason, reality has chosen to express itself that way. So, while it's important for us to understand and dissolve this really solid sense of me, it's also important for us to develop and appreciate a healthy sense of me that can enter relationships, that can move through life, that can play various roles, that can function in various ways. There's a beautiful quote by Martha Graham, the great dancer and dance teacher and founder of a dance troupe, who I really have admired for many years. And she said a lot of wise things, this woman. I don't think she was explicitly any kind of spiritual Dzogchen master or anything, but she often had insights into things. And this is a little quote from Martha Graham. She says, "There is a vitality, a life force that is translated and conveyed through you into expression. And because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is absolutely unique. If it is blocked, it will never exist through any other medium, ever." Beautiful. And that points to the reality, to the importance of a personal sense of self. So there's no self and there is a self. Both are true. I have a kind of final quote. I write a lot, so I'm actually finishing up a book, and I post a lot in social media, so I write quite a bit. And I wrote this not long ago, but I thought I'd just end the talk with this, and then we'll have a little time for questions and answers, because I think this kind of topic would bring up maybe some questions. And sometimes I find in talks that the questions and answers are at least as important, if not more important, than the talk that kind of inspired the questions and hopefully a few answers. But I wanted to read to you this little quote of my own that I wrote. And it kind of sums up my sense of this topic. So I say here, when the transcendent, transpersonal qualities of Buddha or Christ nature shine through our fleeting personal self in an utterly unique and individual way, then the full circle of awakening, the transcendent shining through the you and the me, has happened. The true meaning of our individual incarnation has been fulfilled. But true emptiness is actually fullness, because it contains everything, even you, even me. The mysterious, formless womb of the void is pregnant with all forms. From it, the Divine Mother gives birth to your individuality, which you can discover, appreciate, and even develop, but you can never grasp it in any fixed way. The self, the personal me, is held in no self. It's birthed out of no self. It arises out of emptiness and eventually returns to it. the great gifts of love, unique destiny, giftedness, and infinite emptiness mingle, intertwine. From the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is none other than emptiness, and emptiness is none other than form. Gone, 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 far beyond Bodhi, Svaha, Alleluia. So, you know, there's a little saying, and I'll just close with this. It's an Advaita saying that I learned from Rick Archer, whose talk is going on at the same time mine is, ironically. We're friends, but we see each other's talks, but we can't this time. But there was a little quote that he gave, I think it was from Adi Shankara, who said, even the greatest saints and sages retain a remnant of duality, which my friend Jerry Freeman would say is Lesha Vidya, correct? That they retain a remnant of duality for the sake of devotion. So, you know, in order to love God, in order to sing hymns of praise to God, in order to have a relationship with God, in order to ask God to heal my wife or my husband or whoever, you know, we retain that little appearance of duality for the sake of devotion. And even the greatest saints, the greatest non-dual saints like Ramana and Nisargadatta, Adi Shankara himself wrote hymns to the Divine Mother. I think devotion and a certain kind of devotion to God, which kind of implies a duality, is perfectly fine. And ultimately, non-duality is big enough to hold even duality. So I think maybe we'll end there.
Thanks. That was very comforting.